evening and welcome to the Laughing Monkey Music Show. Today we have on Jeff Young. Jeff, how are you doing?
Bloody well right, my friend. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Disclose we had a little snafu at one point when we were doing this, so we are reliving it on some level. But I'm glad you're back. I'm glad we could talk.
Likewise.
Let's just jump in. So anybody who doesn't know, Jeff is on played a Megadeth. So far so good album, great playing. He left the band, moved on to do a lot of other things. So we want to kind of catch up to what he was doing after that, because he did a lot with a lot of other musicians that were just super stellar. You know, and that's probably the best part to start. What do you think?
Sure. Fire away. I'm at your service.
At your service. Well,
just here to help.
Yeah. Well, after you left Megadeth, you started to go a little different direction musically, kind of take a right turn, and then you kind of got more introduced to more artists as time expanded too. Almost.
Yeah. Well, I've always kind of lived up to the mantra of my radio show, Music Without Boundaries. I've always loved every genre of music, maybe abstained from polkas, but aside from that, I tried to, I love rock, jazz, blues. I noticed after Megadeth, everyone was shredding, and there was the Mike Varney Shrapnel Records movement and a lot of neoclassical players following in the footsteps of Yngwie. And so I wanted to go, you kind of look at the landscape of what's happening and try to figure out how to incorporate some kind of a left turn or give folks a surprise, maybe something that their ears aren't as familiar with. And even though it's an old style, one of the oldest, I actually went back and got a little more into blues and seeing how I could find an equilibrium between like the shred and classical and neoclassical elements and the flamenco stuff I was getting into, and with the more vocal, simplified presentation of blues. So I was trying to maybe walk that tightrope and bring a little bit more of that into my playing.
Well, I think the other thing is, when you get to a point like where Megadeth and all the bands were at that point, once it's popular, something's that popular, to go on is, to be an innovator, you got to kind of keep moving forward. By the time everyone's shredding, everyone's trying to be the next version of what you guys are already doing. So at that point, either you get stale, or you got to keep competing, or you try something different. And most bands have been able to take little turns, or artists, barring AC/DC and the Ramones, who could just do their thing and there was just no penalty. But most artists needed to do some twists and turns.
Yeah. Even look at a fine American band like Van Halen, how they deviated from their original blueprint, whether it was because of a new singer or because Eddie wanted to explore a little more of his first instrument, which was keyboards. So, yeah, I always kind of subscribe to the notion that, and there's been so many great artists in every style, and music's been evolving or devolving, probably both simultaneously. I came upon the notion that the best way to create new, fresh sounding music was, looking to some of the artists that I really got into, like Tommy Bolin, people in the 70s who were there was a lot more fusion happening. And maybe it was rock jazz fusion. And you could say Randy Rhoads even did a little bit of classical and metal fusion with Ozzy. As I got into world music and realizing and discovering not only how diverse the musical styles are from culture to culture, but how similar there's a juxtaposition there. And some styles work very well together. Blues you can hear it in heavy metal, right? But you can also hear it in flamenco. Honestly, flamenco is the blues of the gypsy people, of their culture. You can hear it when the gypsy singers sing. It's a very emotive and a lot of crying. You can feel the emotion in their vocals. So as I evolved, and you can kind of feel in Megadeth that I was getting into flamenco and gypsy guitar styles, because a lot of the scales I used in Megadeth were flamenco gypsy type scales, and which lent itself over progressions that Megadeth had when they would do like these half step progressions. And that's a good illustration. Take a song like Set the World Afire off Megadeth, the end progression where I soloed, which was a E to F, half step, almost like the Jaws theme. That's another good example, right? In flamenco, that's a very popular, albeit played on a nylon string acoustic instrument, not through a Blazing Marshall stack or what have you. You see the similarity, in the real difference in application is the type of instrument and the amplification. You can see how the scales and the musical styles really come from the same essence, and that's probably surprising to people saying Megadeth and flamenco, because it seems worlds apart, right? But I think as you discover different styles of music, that's what we discover, not how different we are as people and not how different the styles are. And there are a lot of kids and younger music fans get into battles in this genre and that, and my music, your music, or my band, your band. You really realize how similar people are, how similar music styles are. There's a Brazilian rhythm I learned when I was traveling in the Northeast, like Salvador, Bahia region of Brazil. The rhythm is called cavaquinho, and it's performed on traditional instruments. Cueca is one instrument that sounds kind of like a seal goes woo, woo, woo. It's a strange instrument, but really cool when you hear it in Brazilian music. And a pandeiro, which is like a deeper tambourine, that in Brazil they've really evolved, where they play it like a drum set, where they can make this tambourine. You're like, wow, it sounds like an entire drum set. But as they were introducing me to this rhythm, I noticed right off, although it's played on folk instruments, there's no amplifiers in sight, that it's a galloping rhythm, like Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, taking from flamenco to Brazilian to American music, and you see, again, not how different people are, not how different music is, but how similar it is. And by taking different, perhaps the rhythms are different. Like in flamenco, a popular rhythm would be 9/16, where a lot of American Western songs are in 4/4 or 3/4. So by taking just these little essences, maybe a time signature, maybe a certain scale, I think that's where new music can come from. It's kind of like a musical jambalaya, right? Or enchilada, depending on your ethnic food preference.
It is. I've always been a big fan of everything. And that's what I try to do, even on the show. Well, actually, maybe just think about that. One of the things that you said with Megadeth is, if you think about it, I mean, your style, Chris's style, and then Marty, really not overall metal. There's jazz, a lot of other stuff outside of metal. Did you feel there's something, maybe actually something with the Megadeth early riffs played into being able to do like the jazz? Like all you guys were very different. Later on, he's got to more of a thrashy, more of a straight ahead guitar players that are good, but the three of you guys really.
Yeah, I think that the blueprint was established with Chris and Gar, who were both huge jazz aficionados. They loved Mahavishnu. They loved Jan Hammer, Alan Holsworth, Jeff Beck, all these kind of, fusion-y players. And you can feel on Killing and Peace Cells how much of that jazz fusion-y influence made its way, into Megadeth's sound. And when they left, you can hear that there's less jazz influence on So Far, So Good, So What, right? It's a little more thrashy, punky, right?
Yeah.
And I came in very late in the game with only 2 weeks left in the recording process for the Megadeth album. So, I wasn't shaping the songwriting or arrangements or like the flavors of the progressions. I had to play into the progressions that were already recorded, right? And either compose something like Hook and Mouth that was kind of like a Flight of the Bumblebee, kind of Russian jig sounding thing with a pitch harmonizer on it, or something like Mary Jane that's more gypsy sounding, and again and more improvised. So it just depended how much time I had, because with 2 weeks left to record and they're just giving you a new tape every day, it doesn't give you a lot of time, because I never rehearsed with the band and I wasn't hearing vocals. I was just hearing like the rhythm tracks, drums, bass. Crazy. And here's your solo spot, start here, stop there, right? Now go, all right?
Insane. Well, I think that's what all my favorite early albums, Megadeth albums, were like you three guys, pretty much. And the others are great guitar players, but there's something different. And you see the early albums for anybody, always everybody's favorites. I don't always subscribe to that, but for this gathering, I'm like, it does, because it's so different with all you guys added. Because like I'm referring to some of your live footage too when you played.
There was a 3-window thing with Megadeth. Peace Sells, So Far So Good, So What, and Rust in Peace.
Yeah,
that was like their Diamond trilogy.
It was.
And Marty, likewise, both of us, all three of us liked more exotic scales, Chris, myself. And it's interesting the path that we all took after Megadeth, and it was organic, I think, for each of us. Chris went more jazz fusion-y, very much like a, Alan Holsworth kind of power trio instrumental with his band Ohm. A great band. And of course I went more kind of world music, flamenco, Brazilian, and Marty moved to Japan and went J-pop, and
you a pop star.
Yeah. And even think of artists, for example, Alex Skolnick from Testament, who was my tour mate, and we always would geek out at sound check and talk guitar, nerd mania till all hours of the morning, noon or night. He ended up going, much like Chris, more jazz, went to Berkeley and studied, and then came up, even did an album where he was fusing styles with, he did Detroit Rock City, but with a jazz interpretation. Yep. So that's another great example of, how new music and new fresh sounds can come from all these existing styles if you're creative and, you pick and choose the things that speak to you, and that's the cool thing, is each person is different and unique. So your music, as long as you're being organic and not trying to copy a certain band or a certain trend, and as long as you're drawing from an amalgamation of your influences, each person's music is going to be as unique as their thumbprint, right?
It is. And you're right. It's funny, the trilogy of albums. So let's talk about you. So afterwards, your world tour of music. So you learned a lot. You're on the road, Europe. You kind of got a whole metal scene. You got expanded on some other fantastic players that arguably could be even more talented than a lot of players you had experienced.
Yeah, I mean, it started probably after, in a circle around to what you were talking about, sound kind of after Megadeth, through a lawyer that was shopping a demo tape that I had done. We ended up in the lap of Diamond Dave Management, which was Pete Angelus and Patrick Whitley, who came from the Van Halen camp with Roth, and Pete directed the Just a Gigolo and California Girls. And they also broke the Black Crowes. And I was kind of in the middle. They had Roth only. He was their only artist, and they signed me. And then they signed the Black Crowes. And there was a point where one night I was hanging at my apartment. Members of my band were there in my living room, and the phone rang, and it was Pete Angelus. And he said, David would like you to come over to his house in Pasadena. And I know Steve Vai had just left the band, and he wanted to talk to me about being the next guitarist in the David Lee Roth band. And oddly enough, it was like a crawl, across your TV screen, and just like, I thought about his voice live, right? And my band's like right there, and I was trying to be loyal, I guess. And I had this vision that he was going to end up in Vegas. And at that time, Vegas hadn't come into its own as, this entertainment capital. It was kind of where old stars went to die, right? So I passed on it, much to my chagrin here and there years later, as I went back and forth with myself. And of course, Jason Becker ended up getting the gig, and he was my buddy. We were just becoming friends, and he was such a sweet, kind person, and he reminded me kind of like of a Randy Rhoads or myself, someone that wasn't about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was more about just practice your guitar, be cool, and then rock and roll, right? And when he got the gig, it came across my radar through the management that, his style was very much in that Shrapnel Records, shreddy, cacophony style of music that he did with Marty Friedman. And he didn't really play blues. That wasn't his forte. And Roth, of course, his vocal style he's like a modern day Louis Armstrong kind of bluesy crooner, right? So they sent him to a guitarist named Steve Hunter, whose name may escape a lot of people, although everybody's heard the opening Train kept a rolling guitar lick on Aerosmith, Get Your Wings. And even myself, as I was skipping school and my parents at work, slowing down the turntable on Get Your Wings to get every lick of that solo as I was bowing and worshiping Brad Whitford and Joe Perry. It wasn't until many, many years later did I realize that it wasn't either of those gents that played those solos on that remake of the Yardbirds Train Kept a Rollin'. That is none other than Steve Hunter on the first half, the halftime, and Dick Wagner, his partner. They were like twin Steve Lukathers of the 70s. They played on so many records, from Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare, and I Love Goes to Hell. Oddly enough, they called their band the Hollywood Vampires on that album, on Goes to Hell. If you look at the back, which Alice brought back to life, that band name, many years later, as we know. Steve played on some of Lou Reed's most classic stuff, Sweet Jane, all that live stuff that we heard was Steve on guitar. Of course, Peter Gabriel, Salisbury Hill, the beautiful 12-string guitar. All that was Steve. He started in Detroit with Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, and just a great player who ended up becoming best friends with Jason, and he played on A Little Ain't Enough, the David Lee Roth album, as rhythm guitar player with Jason, and co-wrote. And the reason I tell this story is because the second I heard that Jason was studying with Steve Hunter, I'm calling up Pete Angel saying, I want to study with Steve Hunter. And before you knew it, before you could say, Get Your Wings, I was up the hill, up in the Hollywood Hills, studying with Steve. And I walked in, I know I was always in the blue. I love Johnny Winter. I happened to see an amazing festival show with him in Sarasota, Florida, where he just floored me. I mean, he came out like he's, his look, and he's albino in the sun. It was like a mole coming out of the ground, right? And they put that little guitar on, that little Steinberger that he was playing. I never saw anyone playing, like, even if it sounded like he may be going into a territory where there may be a wrong note, he would bend it in or make the melody just whipping. I never saw anything like it. So I went in there very much, Johnny Winter, Stevie Ray Vaughan, more modern blues players. Steve said, hold on a minute. And he pulled out Albert King, All Years Gone By. And he put on that first song and dropped the needle on that. And, one of the reasons I play a V, isn't just because of Michael Schenker, but, and I'm a huge UFO aficionado, but, Albert King that whole sound just turned my head around. And he was playing the guitar strung backwards, with the low string to the floor and the high string.
I know the V has always been the original blues guitar.
Yeah.
But I didn't know the stringing was different.
What an amazing revelation. So he took me back before, because these are all the people that, Stevie Ray Vaughan ended up doing that album with Albert King. It was Stevie Ray Vaughan and Albert King. So you see them together, right? And how the vintage blues and the modern blues collided. But it was great for Steve to take me back, and I still have his cassette tapes in my little, I have a cassette binder, and along with all my Chris Poland solos on half speed that I went down to Capitol Records, and I took everything off but Chris's rhythms and soloed those at full speed and half speed, and all his solos at full speed and half speed, and that's how I figured everything out by ear. Right in there's all my Steve Hunter lessons, my Frank Gambale, my Tony McAlpine lesson that I was blessed to have with another great musician that came across my path. And I think, again, as guitar players, we're an amalgamation of the people we listen to on vinyl or digital now or radio or MTV, and the teachers that we meet in our real life. Be that your first guitar teacher, the teachers I met at GIT, from Frank Gambale to Scott Henderson to Dwayne Deo and Tommy Tedesco, Don Mock. Just some crazy, crazy players, to the flamenco players and the Assad brothers. You mentioned some of the great teachers. Yeah.
You played,
and you take a little bit from each person. If you use your noodle, and you remember every great, brilliant thing that you saw or absorbed or were exposed to from all these amazing artists, and that becomes your music, your expression, your language.
Well, I think also you can be exposed or influenced by it and not sound like them. The excitement, the inspiration of the creative process, and how they took something and created it that way. You could see that process and not create that sound, but the same thing with an inspiration, which can be just as big, I do want to say, I think for the Dave Lee Roth thing, there's no regrets there for you. Totally dodged a bullet on that one.
Well, you know what?
And not even in hindsight.
I went back and forth over the years, and to be honest, it wasn't till recently, and I had seen the movie before, but for some reason it hit me this time. Dinah and I showed her Jason Becker's The Documentary, Not Dead Yet. And as I was watching that, it just hit me that if I would have taken that gig, he would have never got that gig. And that one chance that he had to do something, I'm getting chills starting to talk about it, get a little misty-eyed, but that one chance that he had, and I was watching the Not Dead Yet movie, and I started tearing up, thinking, yeah, that was supposed to be his gig. Everything worked out is exactly as it should have. And he got that chance to make that beautiful album and leave that, that history, and work with Steve and all the great players on that album. So that helped me kind of come to terms with that. Along with the fact that I just played the Eddie Van Halen tribute, and one of the guys who just did the Vegas residency told me, "Cat's a lunatic, man."
Yeah. Well, it's
punching himself in the face in rehearsals and stuff. I was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing sitting on the stage at the Whiskey as this kid was telling me his experience working with Roth in Vegas. And I was like, but then he said, maybe that's why he's that personality that can get up there and do what he did.
Everybody deals with they're different. I think who he was, and you've watched him evolve over the years, and the artists that, Eddie and Dave met, it was a good bridge for a while, but it wasn't meant to last. They were so different. And that's why it worked for a while.
Yeah, and a lot of people were down on Sammy, and Roth had his swagger and his stage presence, and in his youth, he was very cool and a lot more macho than he comes off nowadays.
Yeah, but once he did Just a
But
Jake Paul,
Hager's voice, man, when he came in, I mean, and you listen to Sammy Hager on Rock the Nation or Space Station #5 when he was, how old, 19 in Montrose? Because I'm a huge Montrose freak as well. And to have a guitarist like Eddie, and Roth always said he tried to match on vocals and how he was to keep up with what Eddie did, on guitar. And you can see now, if you think about that, his shrieks and how he was trying to do that. But when he just didn't have the range and that kind of voice like Sammy Hager was just, you're born with.
I think he could sing in two at the same time, like to do two things, a split.
Oh, Roth?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dinah does that. It's incredible when a singer can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roth had that thing where he could split his vocal cords. So he
on.
had his own unique charms, and he was great for that. But then you bring Sammy Hagar in, who has that natural rasp and the range to sing a song like Dreams. I don't know if people get how rangy.
How high that is?
That chorus when he's singing, that's rangy. That's
I was
a
happy.
Beautiful melody. And so I love both eras, and I love everything about Van Halen except maybe Van Halen 3.
Yeah, well, that was a different era for everybody. But Roth would have had maybe one or two good albums, I think, in him left with Van Halen if they didn't break up before his voice just went crazy. You know what I mean? Whereas Sammy was just getting better. Sammy's voice still is like leather. Still.
And I'll put with Chicken Foot and The Circle with my buddy Michael. So amazing. I'll say with Roth, I'll have to go with Fair Warning as the album of their era, and with Sammy, I have to go with Balance. I think that's such a super underrated record. So good. Production, songwriting.
Yeah, you're right. It is a good one. They're all good. I love them all. I have to really think about what my Van Halen would be. It goes back and forth. My first Van Halen album was Diver Down, actually.
That was your first one you ever got?
Yeah, I got it in cassette.
And you hear Hang 'em High, just that, the second, no matter how many Van Halen songs you'd heard and how great we knew he was by then, and how many hours we sat in front of our turntables slowing the record down to 16 to try to figure out what he was doing. Still, when he came out with all those licks on that album, from Cathedral to the riff at Hang 'em High, Secrets, the beautiful
everything he did was
clean strat tone on Secrets. Wow.
Right, and that, I think, to me, that was great because I knew the popular Van Halen songs. But when I owned an album, that being the first one, really, I was always open for what he did. So like when Sammy came in and he did more keyboards, like I was my first album being Diver Down, it was probably their most wide range musically for him. So I was open.
Even what he did on Dancing in the Streets, that whole trippy synth thing was.
But that's why when they came out with a 5150, I was like, all right, I'm on board. It's all good. Yeah, I'm messing around.
Same here. And people should be more like that. I mean, for me, art, it's like you go to a museum. Like you take your lovely lady to a museum on the weekend, and you're walking through, and you're not criticizing every painting and cutting this artist down or this sculptor or whatever. You just, the things that, draw you in, you go and you stand in front of that painting and you absorb it and you appreciate it and you let it heal you or touch you, and then you move on. And I think people should be a little more like that about music, a little less judgmental and a little bit more like just take all that you love. There's plenty of music out there, There's like the whole Megadeth Metallica feud, that these kind of feuds, or this genre, that genre, when metal artists do something softer, and the metal dudes, it's got to be metal or die, right?
I think it changed. I mean, when we were younger, that's what it was like. And nowadays, it feels like just that metal community is a lot more forgiving. But now it's these screamo people they can't stand, or like the clean thrash. Now it's divided that way. Now it's like they can't take the really heavy.
As we grow, I like Steely Dan, and I always did. But as I grew to love them and adore them as one of my favorite bands and one of the bands I listen to the most. I mean, there's so many great musicians besides the two creative visionaries of that band. Someone else I loathed in my childhood, whenever a Van Morrison tune would come on, I'd be just like, I couldn't get to the dial quick enough to turn it off, right? Now I love, like Into the Mystic and some of these, Like maybe not Brown Eyed Girl. Maybe I'd still. It's like the cover band, like bands. When people come request that, we'll do any song, but no Freebird, no Brown Eyed Girl, right?
No Jump by Van Halen.
I think as we grow, we begin to widen, and that was the cool thing. And I was lucky, maybe because I played viola and sax, through elementary, junior high, and high school, that I was always more open to different styles of music. And like when Randy Rhoads came out and I heard D, I didn't need to hear any more than that. And I'd already heard Spanish Fly. And even though I was, stuck there in Kettering, Ohio, I found the best classical guitar teacher in town and started having me, showing me that technique so that I could, do stuff like I heard Randy doing and then he came out with Diary with all these different classical motifs, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to do that on, acoustic guitar and bring it onto electric. So yeah, I mean, we're just talking about having an open mind to music and kind of what we were talking about before. The more styles that you're into, the more you can draw into your creative output. Like think of Van Halen, since we're on the subject, how many styles that he incorporated from swing. Like I'm the one that's swing. I mean, you could like have a big band playing an arrangement of that tune, right? To You're No Good, where they took a Linda Ronstadt tune that they barely even listened to the 45. Like they weren't even sure exactly how it went, and it just kind of like what they remember hearing it on the radio. All those different styles. He brought flamenco in with Spanish Fly, right? He brought blues in, like Little Dreamer is a great blues tune. I mean, the pop was there, the jazz was there on stuff like Secrets, drawing from every style. That's your palette. He's just like a painter, and he's picking his colors appropriately for the song. And no Van Halen album came out. I mean, maybe when people heard Jump, some of the people were disappointed, but I don't remember too many people ever being that disappointed with all these different influences. And Zeppelin, look at what Zeppelin did. They were the first world music fusion band. Kashmir, for crying out loud, with all the Eastern influences, their Celtic influences that they had in like Battle of Evermore and these type of songs. They started out as a heavy hard rock blues band, but you saw very quickly, and you think, is it because they're touring the world and they're playing all these different places and they're being exposed to all these cultures as they travel on tour? Is that why they're bringing all these styles? Is that how they're discovering all these styles?
Open as musicians too, because if you're already open as a person, imagine some of the bands that have toured the world and haven't changed their sound, and they're probably still not eating the culture of food. They're probably still going to McDonald's. I'm saying they're probably just still doing that little thing, and the music's the same. It probably says a lot about the person too.
Yeah. I
mean, look at Robert Plant nowadays. He's still doing something different.
The stuff he's doing with Miss Krause. I mean, he's all over the map, and that's great. And that's, to me, and Jimmy Page said it best. What we're talking about at the end of the day, it's light and shade. Music and life. Our life should have that, right? Music should have that. And the best music, if you think from Jeff Buckley to any of the artists we've talked about, to Chris Whitley, to Nina Simone, Billie Holiday, just keep going. I mean, they all had light and shade, those elements always balancing their equilibrium in everything they did.
And it's influenced you. So after you're playing, you took a break from music and you went home and did some family stuff, but you missed music. You came back. So we're kind of where you're currently now. Some of the music you're doing, I know you talk about some of your guitar lessons. Let's kind of get current. What can people experience?
And that actually happened twice, like right on the heels of Megadeth. My father got cancer and passed, so I went back to the family business to be the good son and help my mom. And I went to Wharton and remember the Van Halen song "Sucker" in a 3-piece?
Yep.
I became that guy for a while, but it was calling me. And even in Dayton, while I was working in the business, I was getting into the Brazilian flamenco and playing in an acoustic band with one of my drafting guys at the company was a drummer, and one thing led to he knew a singer and they knew a bass player, and we're playing around in the Dayton clubs just having fun. And I decided I was going to do my own album, world music like flamenco and Brazilian and all these different influences. And I ordered a classical guitar through a maker that I read about in Acoustic Guitar Magazine. Never had played this guitar. But his logic made so much sense. It had an elevated fretboard. Sorry that my dobro is loud and metal, but instead of the fretboard being flat like this, it was more like a harp, angled like this, and more wood, so you could get up here even if it didn't have a cutaway. People could Google it. It's called the Thomas Humphrey Millennium. The Thomas Humphrey Millennium guitar, and actually it became a signature model for Martin. It was the Sting signature model for a while. And the bracing, the way he braced the top, it just made so much sense that I found his number and called him and ordered this guitar sight unseen. And it took a year to make. Him and his wife was Brazilian. He lived in New York, and they made every guitar by hand. And over that time, I was getting more into Brazilian music, and he was telling me about Brazilian artists that he worked with. And I discovered that he worked with the Assad brothers, Sergio and Odair Assad. And I ended up meeting the younger sister, and we co-wrote, and I produced her album for Verve Polygram Records, which is called Chameleon, and it went to #1 all over Europe, and we got to tour the world. Unfortunately, in America, it was a little bit doused because there was a big buyout at Polygram. Seagram's Whiskey came in and bought Polygram Records and Universal Motion Pictures, like right as our album was released, and 3,000 people in America lost their jobs. It was a whole shakeup for the label, for Polygram, A&M, Island Records, and a lot of artists under that umbrella, not just us. So people in America kind of maybe missed that album and the project that I did, but we got to tour the rest of the world, and it was a glorious experience opening for, like Joe Cocker, and in a roundabout in the center of a German town where they set up a stage, or opening for Cassandra Wilson in Hamburg, Germany, just a beautiful jazz singer, or opening for Caetano Veloso, who's a Brazilian. He's like the grandfather. The reason you see David Byrne from Talking Heads moving the way he does, and his love for world music, he has a world music label, as a matter of fact, called Luakabov. He's so influenced by this Brazilian singer that we were fortunate enough to open for in Italy. So that was an amazing experience. And when I get questions from fans, what was it like to play with Dave Mustaine? Or was he as big of an a-hole as he seemed? That's probably the #1 question I get. I always ask myself, I can't believe they're asking me about that when I sat at the feet of these two, the greatest classical guitar duo in history.
I think it's lesser known.
I'll send you this video that I owe you, and you could maybe put it in the chat for people, because I ended up just being able to hang around these brothers at Thanksgivings and Christmases and watch them rehearse and take a lesson from them, or just ask pointers. And when you're around a family like that, they're like the Jackson 5 of Brazil, this family, but with guitars. So when you're around that and you just soak it up, it becomes something that is, again, it's just like talking. You're not thinking about it. You're not getting up on stage trying to impress somebody, or, for
getting better at your
sex,
craft,
drugs, and rock and roll, for money or fame or any of these things. It's and that was what was cool about living in Brazil for the 4 years, is I got to see a very different culture where there's a nylon string guitar in every household. By the end of every party, broke down to a jam session with whoever can play. That was very different for me than American parties, where by the end everyone's just ripped and drunk off their ass and talking about sports, right? So that was an amazing thing. And it gives you a different vantage on how you look at music and musicians. And I think it becomes more natural. I think if people check out this video, the brothers, if you can leave it in the chat, you've never heard two players play together like this. I mean, and one's because they're blood and they've been playing together since they were like young children all the way up, and that's an amazing thing to see. And here also, like when you hear brothers or sisters who sing together and harmonize, and their vocal cords, it's just like there's nothing like that. Even Eddie and Alex playing together, it's that brotherly thing of having that many hours. Because most bands, when they rehearse, they go to rehearsal an hour a day, even if they're rehearsing a couple hours a day or a few hours a week. 2-3 times a week, if that. When you're in this kind of relationship, you're playing together anytime you feel like it, all day. So that was an amazing experience to be around it. It really informed my playing and changed my approach to how I look at music. And I was able to bring that back into rock. And even though I went away from playing through an amp, I didn't own an amp. I sold all my electric guitars and only played fingerstyle or like steel strings for over a decade. Once I came back to electric, I was able to bring all those influences. And again, the things that you learn and you see how, wow, even though I did that on an acoustic guitar, I could do it on an electric guitar.
You got rid of all your electric guitars? That's crazy.
Pardon?
That's like so extreme to get rid of all of your electric, not like keep like one or two.
No, I sold all.
Wow.
Everyone always asks me, do you have the guitars from your Megadeth era, the Tom Anderson guitars that I played? I'm actually going to meet with him Tuesday about maybe making me a guitar. People want a JY signature model.
Oh.
And circumstances may be panning out that there might be a good reason to have one of those later in this year, early next year, with a top secret supergroup project that I'm working on. You wanted to know what I'm doing now, and I'll kind of fill in the 2 spaces from the Brazilian to right now.
Please do.
I'm super excited, and you know what it is, and you know why we can't really say right now.
I absolutely do.
I mean, the real reason we want it to just come out, we don't want a lot of time and people talking about the musician.
Just do it. No talking, just do it.
A lot of drama created in the press about the pairing, the collaboration, but I think it's safe to say Megadeth fans are going to be pretty stoked. And I'm in a group with 3 gentlemen that all come from a very fine pedigree in each of their own rights. And I'm really stoked we've already, some of us live in other states. 3 of us are here in LA, 1 of us in Arizona. He's been in once. We've been working long distance, the drummer and I, and then he came in. We've had a rehearsal. We finished writing. I came in with 2 songs that were like half song ideas, like a few progressions, but not the whole song, because you always want to let the other people put in their ideas. You don't want to, here's the whole song, just play this the way I tell you to play it. So I came in with a few riffs and a few up my sleeve, and in one rehearsal, we finished 2 songs and demoed them, and they're scratched out. And this Thursday, we have our second back in from Arizona is my buddy, and we're going to be rehearsing and recording a song that he's come up with. So that'll be our 3rd song, and we're talking about a really cool cover that we're going to do from the 70s that I think is very timely. I think people are going to like that. So that's slated to come out, I think, later this year, early next, just depending on how everything falls. And my better half and I, Dinah Shirasaki, who some folks may know and love from her all-female AC/DC tribute group, Thunderstruck. They've been around for a couple decades at least and played all over from here to Desert Storm and back, and opening for Journey and Foreigner, and they've gotten around. I just recently got to see them own the day opening for Cheap Trick, Don Felder, and Grand Funk Railroad. It was quite a thing to see at the Moondance Festival. Video evidence of that I can send you for the chat.
Yes,
My radio show YouTube. So we have a little duo. We've been playing around Los Angeles. Our duo is called Tenifer Jen. Just hello, people. TeniferJin.com. TeniferJinn. Really quickly, because you asked me about the name.
Yeah,
Tenifer is the hardening process for metal. Right? And Jen they're like lesser angels that are here to like inspire us. They can be a little mischievous, like maybe spurring you on to like dance or listen to good music or maybe think about how we treat each other, whatever. So TeniferJin.com, that's our new thing. And we have a brand new single coming out that starts out on this, very different than Megadeth, and talking about fusing influences. And I know from our personal talks you love the dobro.
Absolutely.
The song starts out. The song's called Gypsy Soul, and it starts out on dobro in open G tuning. And by the time the song gets into the chorus, it's getting pretty funky and heavy. If you could imagine, maybe like Chris Whitley meets Fleetwood Mac meets AC/DC meets the Ohio Players. I think that's a pretty safe assessment of the tune. If you like any of that jive or like bands like Living Colour, I think you'll like this single we have coming up real soon here. It's actually on the mixing board in Germany with a great up and coming mixologist, we'll call him, and I'm real excited for people to hear it. We've been sitting on the first mix for about a year, and some people have heard the song, but we were being really picky about it, and we were like, this is bugging us and that's bugging us, so it took us a while to find the right guy to mix it. Yep. And I guess underscoring the sentiment that Rome wasn't built in a day. All good things take time, right? So we've been working on ours. So we're working on that, and on a less vocal path, I've been quietly releasing track by track my instrumental album, which is going to be called Revolutions. You say you want revolutions. Pretty timely right now. We need a revolution of some kind. But I've released on my Bandcamp 3 singles. I'm just releasing one song at a time, kind of as time and money afford me to finish, and the musicians that I love to have play on my instrumental stuff. I have to work around their schedules. I've released a single, Monsoon, that's real gypsy fused hard rock with cello, provided by the dynamic and alluring Tina Guo, who's played on a ton of Hollywood movies and a lot of the video games you guys play, Call of Duty. I don't know all these games, but just an amazing cellist with an amazing story. And she played both acoustic cello and she puts her cello through an Engel stack, like a guitar amp, big stack. So you hear both cellos, the dynamics of both throughout. On bass, Rick Firabaci, who up and coming bass player who's played with a few little known artists like Chick Corea and Shakira and Billy Cobham and Blood, Sweat and Tears, Tom Jones. He gets around. He's an amazing bass player. I've been really, really blessed on the bass player front, so I'm really spoiled with bass players. And on drums, Brian Tichy, who's, everybody knows and loves Brian from Whitesnake and Billy Idol and all his projects that he's done over the years. He's in Dead Daisies, I think, right now with Glenn Hughes and Doug Aldrich. So that was my first instrumental single. If you want to check that out, the link is jeffyoungsongs.com is my Bandcamp. You can hear the whole jam for free, and if you want to buy it, you can do that. And we indie musicians love that. I next released a song, and I was happy during the scamdemic and the whole lockdown thing. I was able to release 3 singles.
Wow, they're
Yeah, I
good. I've
mean,
listened to them.
like that, totally self-financed, and musicians during that time not necessarily rolling in the dough, raking in the dough.
No.
But I did put out a, a cover people can see, a remake. I guess it's more than a cover of the Beatles because it's instrumental. The George Harrison song "Something," which people can see on my YouTube, see and hear. Then I released the second single from Revolutions, which is called "In the Flesh." And Rick Firabachi's back on bass, and I have joining me on drums an amazing drummer from Las Vegas named Jeff Totora. I think John Bonham meets Terry Bozzio. And he's been in Blue Man Group since the inception. He's not one of the Blueface guys. He's up in the
Yeah.
but he's traveled the world with that production, and he's back in Vegas with that, and just an amazing drummer. You can see us actually on my YouTube channel recording the rhythm and drum track for that song. The video's there, and we did it in one take, and you see the take, and that take that's on my YouTube, we took to the next level. I sent it to Rick. He put the bass on, and it's just a trio track, just myself on guitars and Jeff and Rick. Kind of surfy, hard rockin', with a cool kind of delay thing. Ronnie Montrose did this delay on when he was in Gamma, on the first Gamma album. There's a song called Razor King where he had the coolest delay, and I figured out that pattern, and I came up with a melody that had that repeating delay pattern. So that's In the Flesh. That's on my YouTube and Bandcamp, whether you want to hear or hear and see. And then my latest single's pretty cool and different, and each of the singles sound different. The new one's kind of a psychedelic, bluesy, hard rock excursion and drop D tuning, and joining me on that is James Lamenzo on bass. From White Lion, of course, Megadeth many years more than I, and he's out with them right now. Folks didn't know he was touring with John Fogerty for a while, which I thought was pretty cool. And James plays a beautiful bass performance on this new single, Mine Slow Burn. I mean, I think it's one of his, because it has a lot of room, and it really lets him express and emote. And I think he was going through some stuff at the time. He just plays beautifully on the track. Jeff Bowder's joining me on drums, who's played with Satriani, Paul Gilbert, a few guys that can play guitar. Shakira, he's also played with Shakira. And I love pedal steel, and I never knew how fortunate I was going to be when I enlisted a lovely lady by the name of Andrea Witt,
Yeah.
who I met through one of my guitar students when I was teaching at Guitar Institute of Technology, Musicians Institute. When he graduated, a lot of students end up in bands and they do different things, and some go somewhere and others don't. But he was in this band and they had a fiddle player. And I always noticed, because I played viola in first grade and I always like a good fiddle or cello. And I kept her on my radar, and she ended up playing with Shania Twain throughout her Vegas residency, and just because she needed to, picked up pedal steel guitar and is like a virtuoso on it, like a savant. Like maybe something about her viola playing lends itself. She's using reverbs and delays, and you've heard the track, it's kind of psychedelic, and the way she plays pedal steel on this track is not it's not Nashville. Right. Although it honors that and it's got that to it. I think people are going to be really knocked out by her performance on this track. And myself on guitar, and I never played a wah-wah pedal before, and I got to do a little bit of that on this song. And yeah, it just turned out really cool. So I hope people check out my Bandcamp, jeffyoungsongs.com. And that's all the news that's fit to print right now. I'm getting into doing some soundtrack work. I think that's very interesting. And when people hear my instrumental stuff, they usually say, why aren't you doing soundtrack work or TV stuff? And I've heard that enough times that I got a few friends out here now that are in that game. And I'm like, can you kind of help plug me into this? So we'll see what happens there.
Well, really, when end on, I know you talk about guitar, you live and eat it and breathe it, but you also teach it.
Say again?
You teach guitar also, still, right?
I've been known to. That's kind of how I got the Megadeth gig. I was teaching.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So for people that are out there,
yeah.
You take on a student still?
Oh yeah. I do online lessons, great rates, and I love teaching folks. I taught at GIT, and to be honest, teaching online, especially since the whole past couple of years, I mean, you can still get your guitar right up in the camera, show the left hand. Maybe you can get closer vantage than you'd be comfortable in person, right? Yeah. Like maybe if I was getting that close with my hands, you might be violating your space. But I have students from all over the world, UK, Japan, and I have some, again, because of the teachers that I've been exposed to, some really, I think any guitarist would benefit no matter what level from a couple of the key lessons that I offer early on. I've got one lesson that I like to get my students on as soon as possible that's more of like a rhythm guitar, more of a chordal approach, because there's an unending amount of chords in the world, and it seems mind-boggling to a beginning student, especially when they start hearing jazz players just whiffing chords left and right with such fluency. Every chord on planet Earth that's ever been played, every pop chord, major, minor chord, comes from a 3-note triad that I call like the mommy. If it's like a family tree, and I call that the mommy chord or triad. And every jazz or like kind of strange altered chord, as we call it, comes from a 4-note cluster, which I'd call like the father, right? And once you understand what those two shapes are, in one lesson, I can teach any student how to play every chord on the planet. Of course, they got to go get the muscle memory and memorize and put it into application. But I can show you the theory that seems to eluded me for decades and decades of music, on various instruments. And it wasn't until maybe a decade ago that I really began to understand how chords are made and how easily it can be explained.
That'd be for like newer.
That's a lesson that I love, and my students seem to love that one. And then I have another lesson that's kind of the other side of the coin, or the companion lesson, which would be more lead guitar oriented. And even if you came in only knowing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, a major scale and not much theory. And I think one of the things that dogs guitar players, and one of the questions I get from new students is, I can't improvise. I can't jam with other people. I feel uncomfortable playing over chord changes. I can teach you how to do that in one lesson. Again, you got to go practice it and work with jam tapes, but the theory of how to do it, I can put it on an index card that you keep on your music stand or in your guitar case till you memorize it. And all you need to ask your sick-ass jazz friends that you're about to sit down with and you're trembling when you got to improv with them, what's the key center? As long as you know that, I can show you how to move that major scale and the other patterns, that accordion or escalator right next to that on the neck, and help you play not just this way, but this way, right? Because we have an XY axis on guitar, not like piano that only goes left to right. We can, that's a unique thing about guitar. So I think those two lessons would benefit almost anybody. I mean, I got guys coming, I've been playing for 30 years. I've been playing for 40 years. And you easily see these holes in their knowledge, their theory, and their technique. And this is one that I can immediately go in right away in 2 lessons, and then it will change your whole philosophy of music and also composition. When I learned this rhythm guitar, how to make any chord from the two parent chords, the first riff I wrote was the opening to Monsoon. And you can hear just from that basic little intro that I did, and just moving the fingers around, right? Hoping the guitar's in tune right now. Right? Just from those beginning chords, you can hear, as the song goes on, how I took, and that's Michael Hedges, maybe something to close on. Any monkey could come up with a chord progression, right? The genius is where you take, like, just that simple little thing that I was playing, right? Where you take that and how you blow it out throughout a composition. And so that was literally the first thing that I wrote after discovering this approach. And you hear the song, what can be created from just one new idea or one new lesson that you learned, you know?
You'll teach all levels, right, too?
Say again?
You'll teach all the levels, right? There's no... Like,
yeah, and that's another thing. I think a lot of people,
some teachers are
and
different
I get
like
after the fact, like I've been meaning to take lessons from you for a while, but I don't think I'm good enough yet, or I don't think I can afford it. Trust me, I know what my peers charge, and I know what I charge. You can afford it. And if you're a guitar player, you can't, you know, you need to afford it. You can't not afford it. And all levels, styles, you know, I'm open to teaching. Again, not big on polkas, but I even teach some country stuff, you know, whatever you want to learn, finger style, playing with the pick. And I think that's a big thing. People who start playing with a pick miss something that fingerstyles player know about how to touch the guitar, how to attack the guitar. And if you play exclusively with a pick, you never learn how to really touch the guitar properly, because the guitar shouldn't be moving up and down. You shouldn't be making the strings go like this. They should be always working like this, like a speaker. And, you know, but it's easy to think as we see people strumming. So the art of picking is making your in strokes, when you do a downstroke with a pick, to make the string go towards the body. And likewise, when you play with an upstroke, does the string go towards the body? If you're making the strings go up and down, that's kind of like taking a bow, if you're trying to shoot an arrow, and pulling the twine sideways like this. You know what I'm saying? So starting with basic like physics things of how the guitar works, all the way up to, again, showing people very quickly how to play every chord under the sun in one lesson, or improvise even over the sickest jazz changes in one lesson. And I think, again, there's a ton of teachers on YouTube and in your news feed, I see them every day, like, you're learning how to play guitar wrong, or this, that, you know, there's all these guys that are offering, who do you take from? There's all these courses that you can take from, and it's all great, but, you know, experience pays, right? And you get what you pay for. So hook yourself up with an email to me at jeffyoungmusic@gmail.com, and I'll give you all the details, prices, scheduling, and we could get with the picking and grinning.
Right. All the deets, as the kids would say. We'll put all the links for everything he's talked about. He'll send me the links. We'll put it underneath the show so you can go check out everything. And you have a show too.
Splendid to me.
And your radio show. Let's end on that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I've been doing the radio show for 11 years. It's kind of on a hiatus here past few months because I've been so busy with this new project and other stuff we got going, and gigs that we've been doing around LA. The show's Music Without Boundaries. You can find 11 years worth of episodes, every week a different theme, at jeffyoungjams.com. I've been thinking to take it on YouTube. People like to see, and I was thinking maybe do more of an interview-based show which I've always done interviews. I've had everyone on my show from Pat Travers on his birthday to John Five, who met me opening when Megadeth was playing with Dio. He came backstage when he was 14, to Steve Harris's daughter, Lauren Harris, to the singer from Kansas, the current singer, Ronnie Platt. So many amazing musicians, to Chris Holmes. I could just go down the list. Many of the Megadeth guys, from Kiko to Lomenzo, have been guests on my show. I play every style of music from every era. So in one show, you could hear Django Reinhardt, you could hear Van Halen, you could hear Megadeth, you could hear some world music, you could hear some George Benson, so, and it's all kind of sewn together with either like musical tidbits or knowledge, but also like from song to song. I got big on finding clips from movies, whether they were educational or funny. You're playing a little block of love songs, a great thing I always like to play. And other radio stations started copying me. And I wasn't too keen when I heard another station. I took the bit from Anchorman. Yeah. And Ron Burgundy says, "Do you really want to know what love is?" And they go into the Starland vocal band, Afternoon Delight. And then, I bust into the next song. And I heard some dude with a show in Salt Lake City doing my shtick on his show. I was like, why you, I oughta. But yeah, so, and again, showing how, regardless of the era and the genre, you can see that music can work together. It doesn't always have to be this radio formatted classic rock here, smooth jazz there, your classical station here, your NPR station there. Let's mash it all up, right? And maybe that's not for everybody, but I had a pretty strong cult audience over the years, and I think there's a lot of people like me that like all those styles of music, like you, that don't want to hear just one flavor all day, every day. So that's jeffyoungjams.com. I hope people go check out the past episodes. I'll be back. I may do some new episodes. I'm pondering that. People are like tagging me like, I miss Music Without Boundaries, and I'm feeling guilty. But I think I might want to try, because I got some other eclectic friends, like guys who are directors of photography of some of the biggest Hollywood movies, like X-Men and Blade and some of the True Lies. One guy I went to high school with came out here and became one of the biggest DPs in Hollywood. I'd love to have him on the show. My other buddy just was one of the producers, cinematographers on the new movie. You guys can catch it on Reels. It's about the biggest concert fire tragedy in history, the Great White Tragedy. The movie is called Guest List, The Guest List. And Dee Schneider's in it. You want to see it just to see Dee's. He's quite a man.
I've seen the previews of it, and I didn't even.
Quite a gentleman, Dee.
Yeah, and I didn't realize even the backstory about that there was a guest list, and that's so powerful. It's even more haunting knowing about the guest list.
Did you see it already?
No, I've just seen the clips of it, and I don't know. Yeah. I'm actually afraid it's too good, and it might actually just bum me out.
I'm getting chills right now as you're talking about. We got to go to the premiere the other night. The premiere was just a couple weeks ago, and it was kind of in an office building, and they had these boutique screening rooms. And Luke invited Dinah and me, and Jack Russell was there, and I met him for the first time, and he was really kind. And the band and Eddie Trunk showed up, and Dee Schneider was supposed to be there. He got lost and went to the new video that's out. Yeah. They filmed the next day. So I think it's called Stand. I'm not sure. I think that's the name of it. He went to the site where they were filming in Pasadena, that's an hour away from where we were, or more in LA traffic. He calls, he's like, what? He was at where they needed to film the next day. So by the time he got to the screening, it was almost done. But by the time we turned around, he was there, and he talked that night. And I think his attitude will surprise a lot of people. He's a really selfless, wants to do the right thing kind of a person, and he's got a big heart, and it comes across in a big way in that movie. Like, I never thought two thoughts about Dee Snider until that night.
Really?
And now I've met him, and I realize, you realize people don't end up where he is or doing the kind of things that they do. Everyone who gets to where there's a reason that they got there. And it may be lost on the public, or the public may get a caricature or a cartoon version of that person. But I guarantee you watch that movie, The Guest List, and you're going to see Dee Snider for who he is. And I think he's a pretty cool cat. And that's all I got to say about that. So these kind of people I'd love to have come on my show, people like Luke, and musicians. And so you can check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. It's called Music Lives Live. Because, who was it that said rock and roll's dead? What song was it? Was it Neil Young sang it, or Gene Simmons said it, or, I don't believe it for a minute, because of all the reasons that we talked about in this interview. If you bring different styles and elements, bits of genres together, new music is unending. And whether it's rock or any style, you can always...
Rock is pretty
Again,
much
when Paco de Lucia, this is a great ending thing, started bringing jazz and other elements into flamenco, it was blasphemy. Because it's called flamenco puro, P-U-R-O, purists. You got to keep it pure. And there's people that believe that, and there's something to be said for that, but look at how many amazing...
Well, there's room for both
It's
kinds.
like breeding snakes or dogs or something. You're coming up with all these new metamorphoses of music just by allowing yourself to think outside the box and not following the rules. And Eddie Van Halen always was one of the best at reminding us to break all the rules. Everything he did was about, from the guitars he played, how he variact his amp with a dimmer switch so he could turn it up and then damp it down, to, playing a guitar. He patented that when he put the guitar up like a table.
Yeah.
There's a patent on that. I mean, think outside the box. That's what music's for. And it's to take our mind outside the box, That's what listeners are supposed to do, not judge music. Just let yourself go with it.
When you have your artist, I always say, you have an artist you like, find out who your artist likes. The example, we'll stick with Eddie. Eddie loved Jeff Beck and Alan Holdsworth. If you're not aware of those artists, go there and then go from there. Go down that rabbit hole, because there's so much.
A lot of people don't know the Alan Holdsworth album Road Games is on Warner Brothers Records, produced by Ted Templeman. Why you think that is? Who you think made that happen for Alan? Eddie told him to not wheedle so much, but that his legato, I don't think Alan listened. But I mean, but if you want to go back and listen to, Alan was staying at Eddie's house a lot at that time. If you want to hear when they were really intertwined, listen to Alan Holdsworth's Road Games, and then you listen to some of Eddie's solos on Fair Warning. I heard Holdsworth creep into Eddie on his solo on And the Cradle Will Rock. You can hear the Holdsworthy vibe immediately when the song comes in. On solos like Push Comes to Shove and Dirty Movies, you can hear he's really into Holdsworth at that point. And I think that's right around the same time, not too far apart, was Fair Warning and Alan Holdsworth's Road Games.
That's what we're going to end on. Everybody who doesn't know who he is, I think you should check him out.
Holdsworth?
Yeah.
The other worldly.
Don't know. Check him out.
And that's a great thing. Everyone who doesn't know who he is, which is most everybody except guitar players, and why the poor man just, he passed and his children have he has nothing to leave them. I'm friends with his daughters on Facebook. They comment. We were private message. Sweet. He has two sweet, they're both married now and lovely girls, and they love and miss their dad. And it's artists like Holdsworth, Randy Rhoads, Dimebag, Django Reinhardt, people in their lifetime, Mozart, people did not appreciate these people in their lifetime until years after, and years and decades and decades and decades after their passing. I remember Flea said something on Letterman, and I think it's a great quote to leave people with. You're not going to find the best music. When he was on Letterman, he said on MTV, there's no MTV anymore, but you're not going to find it in the mainstream. You're not going to be exposed to it via any of the Hollywood marketing machine sources. You need to play Sherlock Holmes yourself, or Nancy Drew yourself. You need to go out and investigate and find these artists like Alan Holsworth or Chris Whitley or Jeff Young or Tennifer Jen, right? Or whoever that are doing music independently, right? And there's a lot of great music out there that people are just missing, and it's sad to see. You know, when an artist like Chris Whitley passes, you know, and you hear all the people in the industry who put him, he had his one major label album produced by the guy who did U2 Achtung Baby, and he was just too outside the box. The label couldn't handle him, and that therefore the public missed this brilliant singer-songwriter. You know, the mainstream gave you Dylan. Cat couldn't even sing a note in key.
Mainstream,
I mean, but yet you never heard of Chris Whitley.
Right.
Or Jeff Buckley. Like, how many people, I mean, of course he passed and his drowning was tragic, and maybe people would know more of him now, but these kind of artists, everyone knows that song Hallelujah now, right? That beautiful song, because everyone's singing it on American Idol, right? That's how the public knows. It's so sad that they don't go back to Leonard Cohen's version or realize Jeff Buckley's version. Because if you know that song Hallelujah and you haven't heard Jeff Buckley sing it and play it on guitar with that haunting production and the reverb on his guitar, go listen to Hallelujah and thank me later.